Pushkin. Welcome back, Car Show fans, for a very special season of the podcast people have called Listenable, and a podcast about cars. We do love our fans here at Car Show, which is why this short 5-episode run will be devoted to picking a car of the year, all geared toward helping you make a totally irrational purchase decision. Yep, just like the big-time car magazines and websites, we will take the measure of all the great vehicles we've driven in 2022 and come up with a winner no one's ever heard of. And just like the big-time sporting conferences, in each episode, these cars will be subdivided into brackets: sports cars, sports sedans, electric vehicles, and SUVs, where they'll face off to pass through to the final round. The winning car of the year will be determined by the best science on the subject, which is basically me talking to a bunch of other car nerds to land on a favorite. And at the end of each episode, we'll take a drive in the winter.
Oh my God. And the ride is really good. It sort of floats over the road. But listen to that. Holy smokes. My goodness.
I'm your host, Eddie Alterman. Without further ado, here's the Sports Cars Bracket with my friend and Road & Track contributor, Matt Farah. Matt also hosts the wildly popular Smoking Tire podcast.
Matt Farah, thank you for being here. Matt Farah invented automotive podcasting. I don't mind saying.
That's not true. But I'll take it.
or popularized it or made it legit or whatever. Allowed us to do what we do here. So thank you, my friend. And
thank you, Eddie.
I thought you'd be the perfect person to get on here to talk about sports cars and the most interesting sports cars we drove this year. You come by it honestly. You have a Countach.
I do.
So you know pain.
Yeah.
You've experienced pain
yeah.
and joy. And you have a Boxster Spider 718 on its way. So you know what's up.
In our conversation, Matt and I throw out a bunch of fancy terms and acronyms. Let me take a moment to define them. The first is P-COTY. That's P-C-O-T-Y. This is an acronym for Road & Track's Performance Car of the Year Award, which recognizes the finest weapons-grade megacar every year. Naturally aspirated refers to an engine that breathes without the aid of a supercharger or turbocharger. Enthusiasts generally prefer naturally aspirated engines because they usually sound better, rev higher, and respond in a more linear fashion. The tenths system. Matt says one of the cars is still fun at 5 tenths. Enthusiasts use the tenths system to describe how hard they are driving and how much of the car's capabilities they're using. 5 tenths means driving at about 50% of your or the car's limits. Some cars even go to 11. The acronym SEMA stands for Specialty Equipment Market Association. They do an annual car accessory show in Las Vegas, and it could only happen there. Imagine 1 million square feet of gigantic chrome wheels, sewer line exhaust pipes, and trippy custom cars, and you're still a few acid tabs shy of reality. Final drive ratio. This refers to the last gear set between the engine and the driven axle. This ratio represents how many times the transmission needs to turn the drive shaft in order to rotate the tires once. So a numerically higher final drive ratio means the final gear set is spinning faster and delivering more torque to the wheels, though not changing the ultimate torque rating of the engine itself. Did I just make that worse?
Before we get into the cars themselves, I want to talk about very briefly what a sports car should do. Do you have any thoughts on the matter?
You know, what I really think a sports car should do is feed the emotions of driving. You know, real sports car driving is tapping into your body's perception of sensations. And those sensations can be in the form of how we feel G-forces, whether that's acceleration and braking or lateral G-forces that come with handling and grip, but also your sight, how the car not only looks when it's parked, but how it looks from the driver's seat out over through the windshield and out over the hood, how it sounds, how the engine sings, the intake noises, the mechanical noises, the exhaust noises, and then also how it tingles you, the actual frequency that the engine and the gear train and whatever vibrates at, and the way that certain cars send those vibrations through the seat and the wheel and your hands. And it's a sort of a harmonious balance of those factors that lead to a great sports car. And it's very rare that a manufacturer gets all of them right. But to me, it's about providing a sensory experience that is overwhelmingly pleasant, enjoyable, and in some ways addictive.
Yeah, I think you did a good Bill Nye style job of explaining that. And
Thank you.
Yes, and a great sports car needs to engage all the senses and
yes,
trigger happy emotions and good vibes.
And there's plenty of cars that can engage one or two. I mean, particularly when it comes to G-forces. I mean, there's plenty of cars out there that go, stop, and turn, really well. And so we might say that on paper, objectively, and people like us who work for magazines are partially to blame for the focusing on the on-paper statistics, because that's one way to show improvement in an objective way. But it's certainly not everything, and it's some of the reasons that, in my opinion, the best sports cars aren't always the fastest cars.
That's right. Numbers are a great way of ordering the world, giving you a sense of sort of concrete stability and an idea, but it's not the same as feeling something.
I don't personally spend my own hard-earned money, and I don't encourage other people to spend their hard-earned money on the car with the fastest numbers. If you think about how often that metric it really is useful, it's very, very rarely.
It's like boasting about glove box volume.
Yeah.
It's like it's somewhat equally irrelevant. But I think a cool way of saying that is that there's no story without the data, but the data is also meaningless without a story.
Sure.
And I think sports cars are kind of the pointy end of the car business. It's where we see that dichotomy between numbers and feel most greatly. And so I think it's a good place to get into it. And
yeah.
I think the one that we should start off with is sort of a controversial car. It's the new Chevrolet Corvette Z06.
The all-new Corvette Z06 is based on the 8th generation Corvette, aka the C8. It starts at around $110,000, and its 5.5-liter V8 engine makes 670 horsepower.
What's controversial about it, Eddie? I'm just wondering what your definition of controversial is. Seems pretty awesome to me. We're pretty spoiled over at Road and Track, so I got to do probably 30, 35 laps around Monticello, and then I got a couple of hours of road time with it as well. I don't know. A lot of people are like, oh, yeah, that thing's going to be a hunk of junk.
Well, maybe controversial is the wrong word, but I think that there are some people who are upset that it doesn't have a manual transmission.
Well, yeah.
There are some people who look at the pricing and say, this thing can almost hit 160 grand.
I think the one we drove at P. Cody was over 160 grand. I think it was like 166.
Okay, so it's a ton of money.
It was expensive.
Ton of money for a Corvette that's always been sort of like the budget supercar in a way, and the world beater. But
sure,
against all that, you have a vehicle in the C8 Corvette, both in the base car and in the Z06, that is just one level higher than any Corvette that's gone before it in terms of its ambition, in terms of its capabilities, in terms of its layout.
Right.
Like The C8 to me was such a brilliantly tuned vehicle because it was an everyday supercar. You know, it was a mid-engine car that sort of like a McLaren 720S. It was silky smooth, you know, in terms of its powertrain, great transmission, great suspension. You could drive it year round, put snow tires on it in a Michigan winter, and you're fine. And when you get to the Z06, you're in another league entirely from past Z06s that were front engine. This car is really worked over. I mean, from the suspension to the engine.
Yeah, I mean, the Z06 proves that with enough allocated resources and dedicated smart people working on it, it is possible to reverse engineer a Ferrari 458 Speciale and bring it to market in about 6 years. I mean, I think that's pretty much what they've proved here with that engine, which has all the revs, but also doesn't give up on its torque. And in general, what I think Corvette is always meant to do is democratize what the high-end European stuff is doing for approximately a third of the price. And $160,000 is very expensive, and that's a pretty loaded up Z06. You can get into one for about $125 that'll have some decent options on it. The one we drove at P. Cody had the Z07 package with the carbon fiber wheels. And so ours was about as expensive as it gets. But you do the math, and although many people out there might think of a Ferrari F8 Tributo or 296 as being a $300,000 car, the truth is it's a $400,000 car. And so the Z06 does get you that level of performance, and it approximates that amount of style. It's not quite as elegant as the Ferrari, but it's mid-engine. It is good looking, and it is usable. I mean, there's very little about the Z06 specifically that takes away its everyday usability versus the base C8. On the road, I mean, they're doing something that the big Italians and the Europeans really aren't doing anymore, which is naturally aspirated, rev-happy V8s, which is a phenomenal achievement. You know, we were with a GM engineer at the track when we were doing our P. Cody thing, and we heard this Z06 fly by with one of our editors driving it. And the guy from GM laughed, and he goes, "Can you believe Ferrari had this?" And went, "You know what? Let's move on."
Right, exactly. You know? No, I mean, that sensory experience of the Z06 is extreme. It's not that low burbling V8 you might expect. It's that harsh bark of an exotic, and that's to me one of those elements that really separates it from a run-of-the-mill Corvette.
Sure.
This is an instance where going backward to a naturally aspirated, non-turbocharged, flat plane crank V8 really pays off. And I think that their focus was absolutely dead on, that they picked one of the best Ferraris of all time, that 458 Speciale, and really honed in on it. But they also, to your point, they made it much more livable, much more of a Four Seasons supercar. And to sort of tie up the Z06 in a bow, because we want to move on to some other cars, this is a car that I think nails a lot of the sensory aspects. You know, it sounds incredible. The front end bite on this car is insane. Like the steering response is amazing. The thing just feels so stout, and you feel like you could drive it through a brick wall.
Yeah. And the gearbox, there are people who complain about the lack of a manual, and I do understand. I like driving stick on my fun cars, and I hear them. But the fact is, this car is so fast that you'd never be able to keep up with it with a stick. It grips so hard, and it does what it does so fast that you really need to have two hands on the wheel to drive it quickly. And what it does really well is, despite its air quotes focus for track and lap times, it is fun at 5/10. It is a lovely car at 5/10. And you don't have to get the crazy Z07 package to enjoy it on the road. You put it in drive, just regular automatic mode, and it is very refined and very pleasant. And they've done a phenomenal job. The body panels, you park it next to a Porsche, and some of the panel gaps were a little, wonky. But it's such a good performance value, and when you're driving it, It's clear where the resources have been allocated.
Yeah. And the fact, like that you said, that this is a car that you can drive at 5/10 and really enjoy it, and you don't have to get to the limit with it, that, puttering around at 45 miles an hour or 60 miles an hour on just a winding road, still incredibly fun, incredibly responsive. It's an unbelievable achievement. No question about it.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you like the concept of it, you'll like the execution. I don't know anybody who is into the concept but not the execution of this car.
Totally. It's great.
It's not going to disappoint anyone who's got an order in. Keep your order.
No,
if you've got one in.
It'll blow your mind, no question.
When we come back, more sports cars with Matt Farah.
So let's move on to car number 2, which is not quite at the level of the Z06 Corvette, and that is the Nissan Z.
The Nissan Z, just Z, not 280Z or 300ZX like back in the day, is a relatively straightforward rear-drive sports coupe. It has a 400 horsepower twin-turbo V6 and starts just north of $40,000.
So the Z is an evolved version of the old 370Z, but this is not how...
Which is an evolved version
exactly.
of the 350Z.
But can I just say that this is not how evolution is supposed to work. Evolution means that something is more adapted to its moment than before. And I don't feel like this Z is. I think it looks great, but it just feels coarse and rough and not fully realized, not fully, sort of executed. And have you spent a bunch of time in the thing?
Decent. I went on the launch. I drove it on the track, and I did, 150, 200 road miles on it. I then drove it again about a month later for a little bit. I hear you on your criticisms of it. On the other hand, I think that we have a real problem, not just in this country, but globally, of having so many choices for the very rich.
Mm-hmm.
There have never been more choices. If you want a 7-figure car, you've got like 20 different options to choose from. But if you want a $50,000 or $60,000 great sports car, you have fewer options than ever before. And that is a real sad reality of not just our world for the consumers out there, but for someone who makes videos about sports cars.
And Matt, I hear that, but I don't think that this thing feels like it's worth $50,000.
Yeah, it might not feel like a $40,000 or $50,000 car, and that's totally a valid point because it is fairly basic. It has knobs. It has, it doesn't have some fancy schmancy. I mean, it does have a touchscreen, but it's not like a great one.
It's got the old seat adjuster on the inside of
the old school seat adjusters. Yeah, no, and I hear you. On the other hand, it's reasonably quick. There is going to be a fantastic aftermarket for it. The measuring session for SEMA was like so popular, they had to extend it to a third day. So I imagine this year's SEMA show will be packed full of modified Zs. There are a lot of people who are looking for a relatively simple, tunable, daily drivable sports car option. And while Nissan has never made the most refined engines other than the Skyline, the R series 32, 33, 34 Skyline, and that one of the best engines of all time. Yeah. But their V6s have never exactly been inspiring to me. But in a world where the 86 twins are nice cars, but what does a Subaru mean versus a Toyota? And the Supra and the Z4, they're both nice cars, but the Toyota one is such a BMW in every way that matters.
But it's so good.
Embarrassing.
But it's so good. It's like tuned better.
Yeah, no, it is. It is, and it's more expensive. It's spec for spec, it's probably 10, 12% more expensive than the Z. And so to go back to what I started this conversation with, what I like about the new Z is that it is itself. If you're buying a Z, it's a Z. And it has some interesting throwback details that are blended with modern style in a way I like. It is usable every day as an only car. It's going to be tunable, and Nissan is friendly with the aftermarket like that. And it's got its own character. Now, whether or not you like that character, well, that's up to you. Fine. But having met the people who build it at the launch and talked about their passions for keeping it its own thing, I really like that they've done that. And I think, although it may not objectively lead to the best car possible, if they sourced a BMW inline six, it might be a little
Right.
less rough and gruff. And there are some areas where the car can be a little unrefined, that's for sure. But for the amount of money you spend, it is fast. It is tossable and small and doesn't look bloated, and it doesn't have a bunch of crap piled into it. And you can turn the traction control off with just one button. From my perspective, it gets credit for being itself and existing more so than it gets credit on being better objectively than some of its competition.
And I do agree with all that. And I love the way it looks. And I think it's a great sort of mix of retro and kind of future styles. And it's more than just sort of applied styling cues, right?
No, it doesn't blow my mind. Oh, the platform goes back to 2003. It doesn't feel that old. They've done enough to it to make it feel like a mostly new product. It does have that turbocharged engine, which does have a pretty linear power band, and there will be options for the aftermarket and from Nismo themselves.
Because I hope it sounds better with those aftermarket pieces, because it sounds like a Pathfinder.
They had one. They had one at the launch with a prototype Nismo exhaust on it, and it did sound pretty nice.
I guess my issue with it is, a sports car needs to be about sensitivity. The car is sort of in conversation with you.
Sure.
And that car to me was not. It felt a little cold. And then when you really pushed it hard, I felt like the thing fell apart.
It does. Well, that car is the same as like a Mustang GT. If you really want it to be its best, you kind of have to finish it yourself. You're going to have to tune it with maybe a slightly different tire and wheel setup. You're going to have to do a little bit, because it's got to be everything to everybody. It's got to be the kind of thing that a person who doesn't really care that much about cars but likes how it looks is going to drive it in the city and on bumpy roads and doesn't want it to ride like crap. And then and you need that person just as much as the enthusiast to sell cars to. And same thing with Mustang GT. Mustang GT is a great package, but you wouldn't want to take one off the showroom floor and start doing track days with it. It would be a little sloppy, but it rides well on bumpy roads. So if you really want to,
you don't even want to take it to a Cars and Coffee, do you?
No. But if you want to narrow the focus, the option is there for you to do that in the aftermarket, and those are the choices that they've made.
These are good points. I think you turned me around a little bit on the Z. So let's move on to a car that I feel is unexpectedly and fully resolved and just blew my mind when I drove it. And it was a Toyota Corolla, specifically the GR Corolla in the Maurizio edition.
The GR stands for Gazoo Racing, which encompasses Toyota's motorsports division and builds its hottest road cars, like the Supra. This special Corolla has a turbocharged 1.6-liter, 3-cylinder engine, pumping out 300 horses. It only comes with a stick and all-wheel drive, and the extra special Maurizio edition climbs to north of 50K.
Let's talk about what this thing is. The Toyota Corolla, is a rolling tab of Ambien in base form, right? It is like the cure for insomnia, the most boring car of all time.
But you know what? Credit to them. It's not a bad car. The newest Corolla, I've rented them. I drove the press car, actually, the regular car. It's got great seats. It's built really well. I mean, it's just, if you said car, it's a great car. It's not exciting.
they do the best research of anybody. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're going to get 8s across the board in engine, seating comfort, trunk space, but that results in a pretty bland car. You want some ups and downs. The GR Corolla, on the other hand, is all ups and downs, and it is just wildly exciting and explosive.
Yeah, it's a wild package. I drove it on the track before I drove it on the street. So literally I sat in it and straight out of pit road onto the track. And within 2 corners, I went,
Right.
oh, they're not messing around. It's really designed to assault your senses. And you have to drive it hard to really appreciate it. Especially the Morizo edition is so stupid. I mean, it's it's stupid in the kind of way that people like us, the real nerds, appreciate. Oh, let's take out the rear window regulators and the rear speakers and the rear wiper to save 3 pounds. Like, bro, like, come on.
I know. And this is a car that gets better the more you hammer on it. Like, the engine only really wakes up above 3,000 RPM. And so this is just such a weird little car, a turbo 3-cylinder that produces 300 horsepower, and it sounds like nothing else. And you can adjust the front rear traction bias through the car, and it's pretty vivid. You can tell
the knob
does things. It does work.
Yeah.
And I got out of an RS3 Audi and into this car. So I was like, oh my God, this thing sounds so much better.
Yeah.
It's so much more responsive. The steering's so much better than that really expensive Audi. And so that's why I put it on this list. To me, it's a sports car. It's a car that is really driving a lot of those sensory inputs.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, it's definitely a sports car. There's no question about that. I mean, this thing is liquid hot fizz. On the track, it is really, really fun. I mean, to just huck it and smash the throttle, and do a nice big 4-wheel slide. It's very controllable at and beyond, the limit. So I haven't driven the regular one, and I've been trying to get a hold of Toyota to drive the base variant, because it's not just the weight reduction with the Morizo. The Morizo has more torque. It also has a different final drive, so shorter gear ratios, which when you've got such a peaky engine, makes a big difference. And they're only making 200 of the Morizos. But other than hardcore collectors, I don't know anybody that really wants a $54,000 hatchback with no back seat. It's a little dumb, but it is incredibly engaging. The shifter, the pedals, the wheel, the seats. I mean, all of those inputs are as good as you'll find almost anywhere. It's clearly a focused product. It's clearly the most exciting car that Toyota has given us in quite some time. And they should get all the credit for that. Having said that, I drove it also on the street. And when the road is less than perfect, it was quite bouncy, and it really beat me up a lot. And I was really hoping the suspension would act a little more like a rally car and a little less bouncy. Maybe the regular one is different and a little more compliant on the street, and that's why I'd like to drive it, because I felt the Morizo edition was so exceptional when the tarmac was very good, but really, really brutal when the tarmac was bad. And that's not what I want out of a hatchback, even a very well focused one,
Yeah, I hear that. Ride is so important, no matter your age or body mass index. I mean,
look, the best sports cars I've ever driven in my life.
Ride great.
The McLaren 720, different various 911s and Caymans and Boxsters and
the Z06,
C8 Corvette. Even my Lamborghini Countach have beautiful compliant rides. Lotus Evora GT. These cars are not harsh. They have beautiful rides.
Agree.
And so if you've got a really stiff ride, sometimes you're trying to cover up some other poor handling trait. And sometimes you're doing this sort of motorsport theater thing where it's like, regular folks that aren't as fine-tuned to their senses will do a test drive for 10 minutes and feel a stiff car and go, oh, it's stiff, it's sporty, you know?
There's a macho-ness to that kind of, to that like brutal sportiness.
Right.
And like, oh yeah, it must be really, really
Right.
fast and really like hardcore. But the GR Corolla to me is like, they're making up for their past transgressions, their past Camry transgressions.
Totally.
It's a special, special little car. And to me, it's a vivid experience. It's worth the money. And those kinds of vivid experiences are like vanishingly rare nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah. And my hope is, and I say this without driving the base one, but my hope is they will offer the final drive, the lightweight wheels, and the extra torque on a variant that also has, a back seat and a full radio.
And more suspension compliance, exactly.
Yeah, they took away the rear wiper, and oh, by the way, I drove it in the rain for P-Cody. The rear window is like covered in road schmutz, and I'm just going, yeah, you know what I'd like right now in this hatchback is a rear wiper.
Exactly. It asks a lot of its driver.
Yeah, it does. But it's a pretty badass little ride, and Toyota gets points for building it as well as they have.
It shocked me. It shocked all of us.
When we come back, Matt tells me about the one car in this bracket that he spent his own money to buy. I'm Eddie Alterman, and this is Car Show.
Let's talk about a car that I think is near and dear to both of us, and a car that does ride great, still feels special, and to me is sort of the acme of that thing you were talking about earlier, which is harmonious feedback, kind of maxed out feel, a car that feels like it's just been sanded down and honed and like worked over until everything was absolutely perfect, and the feel of the shifter matched the responsiveness and action of the clutch pedal, and the body movements matched the steering perfectly, and the transitional behavior, was almost like a giant slalom skier. This thing could change direction so expertly and just filled you with joy. I'm talking about the Porsche 718.
Now, the Porsche 718, also known as the Boxster convertible and the Cayman hardtop, are not technically new. But they're so good that I just had to put them on this list of best cars I've driven this year because they were. I like mine with a 4-liter flat-six engine, which is available in Boxster Cayman GTS and higher trims.
I do love these cars. I think they are the best cars that Porsche makes. Great balance, great inputs, great use of space. It's a very spacious car, but it doesn't take up very much space on the road. I liked it so much I bought one. I own a Boxster Spider, but at the same time, my car is modified a little bit. It's not exactly left alone. But
why did you decide to go that extra step and modify the car? And tell me what you did to it.
Well, just because a car is one of the best sports cars on the market, it doesn't necessarily mean it's perfect. I feel, and I've said it very consistently over the last 5 or 6 years, that although the Cayman GT4 and Boxster Spider are the best cars that Porsche makes, they don't make them as good as they could. And they do it for a variety of reasons. One is to keep people buying GT3s.
Say more about that.
Well, I call it the Cayman complex, which is where any manufacturer holds back on one model in order to maintain a hierarchy with a higher model. And it's just my theory. Porsche has never officially corroborated it. But I felt like if they started putting 911 engines, like the GT3 engine, into the Caymans and Boxsters, that they would significantly cut into the 911 sales because they're the power and the performance.
But here's the thing that I sort of take issue with in that kind of scenario is that the 911 person doesn't want to be in a Cayman. the Cayman person, I think, is a truer sports car enthusiast than your average 911 person. I think the 911 is more about show now. It's gotten so big. It's really a 928 with the engine in the back. And I don't think it's I don't think it's the driver's car that the Cayman is. And I think that a lot of the sort of harder core Porsche folks who love the lighter weight 911s find themselves in these mid-engine Cayman Boxsters because it's not for them about display. It's about what is the most satisfying, most feedback-heavy sports car I can get. And it ain't the 911 now.
I agree with you. I mean, look, I've driven, with the exception of the new RS, I've driven every other 911 that's on the market right now, and I have a lot of miles in them. And I could have bought one of those. I mean, I could have, but I bought the Boxster Spider because I think that's the best car Porsche makes. I think it's the right size for the roads. You know, our roads haven't gotten bigger. The cars have gotten bigger. The roads are the same size. And I think it has the best balance on the street. I think it has a great shifter. I think it has good room inside and good practicality and is a great sensory experience. Probably the best sensory experience that you can buy right now, period. I live in California. I love driving with the top down. I love experiencing the outdoors around me while driving. I think that's the best car they make. Why did I modify mine? Because I can make it better. Every time I've driven a Cayman GT4 or a Boxster Spider, I've said the same two things. The chassis is perfect. The inputs are perfect. The brakes are perfect. The steering is perfect. The size, shape, weight are perfect. But it could be even better if it had a bit shorter gear ratios. It's interesting that the car comes from the factory with more chassis than engine. And that leads me back to what I call the Cayman complex. Yeah. You know, Porsche can, and they now do, but they could build faster versions of the Cayman and the Boxster. They would still be drivable and usable as street cars.
So let's stack them up here. I think of the 4 most interesting sports cars we drove this year, I think the Z is the least interesting.
It gets points for being an affordable sports car with a great aftermarket and a great platform to finish yourself and make a weekend canyon car, track toy, daily usable at a reasonable price, but it's in very tough company here.
Very, very good effort, but fell short. Yes. I think my third pick, I hope you agree, is the GR Corolla. For many of the same reasons. The relative affordability of it, the kind of piquant nature of the driving experience, and just how real and how alive that thing is and how much fun it is. And just like the sounds, the smells, the looks, just awesome. Yeah. And then, so, you know, drum roll, I think the runner-up in this bracket is Z06. Would you agree or would you not?
Interesting. Actually, I'm going to disagree with you. I would put the Z06 on top and the GT4 Boxster Spider underneath it, mainly because if the Boxster Spider and the GT4 came out this year as new product, maybe it's just because I'm used to them. Maybe it's because I don't see the Boxster Spider and GT4 as being brand new, revolutionary, game-changing product right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just basing on stuff I drove this year that I liked.
Okay, sure.
So totally unscientific.
Well, we had the GT4 RS at P. Cody. And for me personally, it was a tough toss-up between the Z06 and the 4RS, especially on the track.
And those are the same price, really.
The 4RS was a little more expensive as equipped. I think the one we had was $190, and they can get as high as
wow.
like 240. I think, to go back to the point, I think the Z06 is such an engineering achievement that has so few flaws, downsides, sacrifices, compromises. I don't think there's anything on the Z06 that they didn't make as good as they possibly could. They've done a really good job with the interior. I still am not sold on the square steering wheel, but the fit and finish of the interior, the metal, the leather, the seats, I thought was exceptionally well put together on our test car. Yeah.
Okay, so what we're talking about is a difference in, hundreds or thousands, at the sort of ragged edge of performance. And
Yes.
yeah, I can see like the Z06 is a much greater achievement, without question, much more important car. They created something that's probably better than a Ferrari.
It's more fun than the last two generations of Ferrari's mid-engined product.
And it's got a better interior.
Yes.
It doesn't have all the cheap shit that you get in
It actually does. The current Ferraris are not the
joke.
812 is pretty good. The Roma is pretty good, but the F8 was not great.
And so if you look at this sort of arc of Corvettes going from these sort of, the Blue Flame 6 in the 50s and these lightly engineered, sort of C3s, and always sort of in the shadow of European performance. Now with a mid-engine car like the Z06, it is fully at the level of a Ferrari, a Lamborghini. There's no excuses to be made, no apologies. It is absolutely there for a third of the price, and holy shit. Like, yeah, okay.
In a lot of the ways, it absolutely is. I mean, the only thing that still lacks is like body panel fit and finish. I mean, that's really the one thing that
it's a fiberglass
yeah,
car.
I mean, it's the one thing they've never really managed to quite get all the way there with. And that's the difference. It's like here I am on a show with you saying that the most exciting sports car I drove this year was the Z06. And meanwhile, the one I spent six figures on to take home and keep for the next 20 years, is the Porsche. And part of that is because in my own life versus in the service to our viewers and our readers, I want to drive stick. I want to take the top down. I want that precise level of quality and attention to detail at every level.
Yeah, so it is an astonishing achievement. And I think what it comes down to in your choice of the Boxster Spider versus a Z06, which are, to most people's thinking, different levels of cars in a way. I think it comes down to, do you like Porsches? Are you a Porsche guy? Or are you a Corvette guy? Because, hey man, these are avatars for who we are. They reflect what we want to say to the world. And if you don't want to say you're a Z06 wide body Corvette person, and you want to say, hey, you know what? I have a much more measured approach to automotive performance, and the stuff that you can't see is sort of what's important to me on the inside, then you're Boxster person. I happen to align with that way of thinking, and that's why I had 718 as my top pick. But considering everything you're saying, considering the breakthroughs that they've made in every area in Corvette, and going from a Corvette that was, really impressive, like a Z06 that was really impressive for a front engine car, to a no excuses, oh my God, absolutely at par or over and above the Italian exotics. Yeah, okay, let's give it to the Z06.
Yeah. Beautiful car. It's phenomenally done. And it's not like you're going to go wrong with either. And by the way, the car I've kept the longest in my whole life, I had a C5 Corvette that I bought new in 1998, and I sold it in 2016, and I had it for 18 years. And I was a Corvette guy, and I became a Porsche guy. And the Z06 is the kind of car that might one day bring me back to being a Corvette guy. And I think they're going to get a lot of what they call conquest sales, where there's people that don't necessarily see themselves as Corvette people, but this is a different product, and it might bring some of those folks back. And so, kudos to them.
Yeah, great job, GM.
Having crowned a winner of round one, I'm off to take a drive in the 2023 Corvette Z06.
All right, I'm starting up the Corvette Z06. Sufficiently loud. That's from the driver's seat. But let me close the door here. Much quieter. But when it idles down and warms up a little bit, I will goose the throttle. Let you hear that. Mean. So when you sit in this thing, you're sort of packed into the front of the car, with your feet pretty close to the front wheels, the engine and transmission behind you. It's got these big strakes down the side, big openings in the side to give air to the engine. And it's pretty badass looking. This one's brown, which I kind of like. It's sort of stealthy. It's also a convertible version. In front of me is a squarish sort of steering wheel. It says Z06 and a number plate on the bottom of the wheel in the 6 o'clock position. All right, tons of engine presence in this thing from the get-go. It's just very, very aggressive sounding. The base Corvette is a lot mellower, and it's much more sort of everyday supercar. This thing feels and sounds a lot more exotic. The steering is really responsive. It's not jittery, but it's responsive. It's interesting that this car has 670 horsepower. That's the exact number that the NASCAR racing stockers make. And I think that's intentional. This 5.5 liter V8 makes that number as a sort of nod to its competition aspirations. Ultimately, this is a car for the track. As good as it is on the street, with its flat cornering and its insane grip and the power everywhere, this is a car that you can only really appreciate its full capabilities on a racetrack. It's staggering that it can be so civilized and do the things that it can do on a road circuit. It just loves to run. It's amazing. Oh my God. And the ride is really good. It sort of floats over the road. But listen to that. Holy smokes. My goodness. And the shifting is very smooth. I mean, you could drive this thing every day. It's not too darty. It's not going for, the crown in the road. It's not busy under your hands or under your feet. It's just, you feel like you're using maybe 1/20th of its capability, even when you're exceeding the speed limit by a gross amount. But man, it's good. Yeah, I could drive this thing every day. All right, here we go. Oh my God. Oh my God. Just loves to step out. Yeah, it always wants to step out sideways. The traction control and feathering of the throttle help keep it in line, but listen to that. It's just so wild, so untamed.
Car Show is written and hosted by me, Eddie Alterman. It's produced by Emily Rostek and Jacob Smith. Our editor is Karen Shakurji. Original music and mastering by Ben Tolliday. Our executive producer is Mia Lobel. Our show art was designed by Sean Carney and airbrushed by Greg Lefevre. Our patron saints, as always, are Lital Malad and Justine Lang. Car Show is a production of Pushkin Industries. If you love this show and others from Pushkin Industries, consider subscribing to Pushkin Plus. Pushkin Plus is a podcast subscription that offers bonus content and uninterrupted listening for just $4.99 a month. Look for Pushkin Plus on Apple Podcast subscriptions. To find more Pushkin podcasts, listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.